Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we finally get to review two big films that came out at the end of 2023 that we've been waiting for. We'll be looking at Sean Durkin's The Iron Claw. But first, it's going to be Andrew Haig's All of Us Strangers. One night in his near-empty London tower block, screenwriter Adam has a chance encounter with mysterious neighbor Harry, puncturing the rhythm of his everyday life. As a relationship develops between them, Adam finds himself drawn back to his childhood home, where his parents appear to be living just as they were on the day they died 30 years ago. This is the third film we've seen from director Andrew Haig. Ariana, before we talk about All of Us Strangers, let's just talk a bit about our experiences with Haig's films. We've seen Weekend,
Yes.
which I think was his feature debut, or at least the feature film that kind of established his name. A same-sex romantic drama, I guess you would call it.
Yeah.
And then Lean on Pete, which is a kind of a coming-of-age movie. It's about homelessness in America, about a young boy, very kind of like tragic, sad, but ultimately hopeful. And he's made other films we just haven't gotten to yet, but those are the two we've seen. What do you think of Andrew Haig as a filmmaker in general?
I think that so far he is an incredibly good writer when it comes to especially getting the performance that he gets out of his actors. They feel genuine. It doesn't feel as if, oh, this person is acting and this is like a character on the screen. They feel authentic. And the conversations just feel as if like you're a fly in the wall, like watching these two people communicate with each other.
Yeah, I would say that was one of the things I wrote down in my notes was just the actors are lost within the roles.
Yes.
And you completely believe them as these people. Like Andrew Scott, I never thought of him as I'd seen him in any other context. He was Adam. That was it. That was who he was. And we'll talk more about those specific performances in detail a little later. One of the things that I feel is ever present, especially in this movie, is Andrew Haig really treasures strangeness and intimacy.
Yes.
And by strangeness, I mean, and I looked up this definition of it to get it clear, unusual or surprising ways that are unsettling or hard to understand.
Mhm.
So it's things happen that defy logic, and the film is just telling you, you just have to go with it. These are the rules of what's happening now. There's a lot of interplay between what's going on in Adam's mind versus what's happening to him externally. And there's a big chunk in the middle where I felt like I was really doing a lot of questioning of, is he losing his mind?
Oh, yeah.
Or is he dreaming this? And I love that the film ultimately by the end kind of is like, no, he really met the ghosts of his parents. That's what really happened. And that it just sells it in a way that you never feel that it's incredulous or anything. You're just like, oh no, it's because it's not a movie that's wanting to create a logic necessarily. It's a movie that's wanting to explore emotion.
Yeah, and it does it so beautifully well that when you're watching the film, you don't know immediately that he is a screenwriter. You just see that he is like on his laptop describing what year it is, and then him visiting the home, like his hometown. We don't see him approach his home. We just see him like looking outside of it, like comparing it to photographs that he has with him.
He's like walking by on the sidewalk.
Yes. And so you almost assume that because he's writing a screenplay about his childhood, that he's losing himself in these make-believe scenarios, much like you would when you're reading a book or you're really getting involved in writing. And I felt that genuinely at times whenever I've just gotten like really submerged in fiction, that it feels like, oh, I'm living another life. There's something very satisfying about it, especially if you live kind of a lonesome life, only for it to
Lonesome. I mean, we've been married it'll be 13 years in July.
I mean, like beyond just like you and I, like,
Okay.
but it's just how then afterwards, before you're kind of like, oh no, it's him having a make believe moment in his head. The film's like, no, he's visiting them. Like,
Well, I loved how calm he was
yes,
because, and the way you're talking about the way the film, this would be like the economy of the film, I think would be the right term. It's how how Andrew Haig chooses to reveal things.
yes,
And he's very economical in that we don't see a single photo of Adam's parents. We see him looking at photos, but the angle we're at, we only see the back of the photographs. So we don't really see what he's looking at.
yeah,
We know that from just a brief glimpse of his screenplay, this has something to do with his childhood home or something. And so then when he goes to this suburb of London and he sees this man, and the film lets us know that he recognizes this man and he's following him.
hmm
And then eventually they encounter each other outside of a store, and just the complete calmness that Adam shows, where he's not even shocked or surprised. And his
yeah,
dad's just like, oh, well, it's been so long since like you've come around. Like, how are you? You want to come back to the house for
yeah,
dinner?
and it's also very
It's so casual.
yeah, and even if there is surprise, it's subtle.
Yeah.
Because at first, like the performance is, oh, I thought that was you. I recognized you around the eyes. Of it just being like, I haven't seen you in such a long time. And then when the dad goes into the house and it's supposed to be like he's speaking to his wife, he's like, guess who I found? And she goes out and she's just like, and the casualness of them just being like, oh no, just come inside. There's like, you should be coming inside. Like, we want to see you.
And that's what's interesting is the way they understand there's been a lot of time since they've seen him. But then as the film goes on, we realize they don't know, like, they don't necessarily know that they're dead. They do become aware of it at a certain point,
Yeah.
and they don't even remember how they died. So it does leave that question of, are they actual ghosts? Are they something in his head? The sort of uh how calm he is when he meets them also kind of made me think, does he daydream about them a lot normally?
Yeah.
Like, are these things that goes on in his head every day?
Yeah, and it's something that you start to think that it can be that he's been daydreaming about it, especially like the heartbreaking conversations that he has with his parents, and then later on, like revealing towards Harry about like his feelings about it. The conversations are so genuinely and so written so beautifully because a lot of the times I feel like whenever I've seen like queer cinema is particularly towards like representation of gay men, when they talk about the coming out, it just feels as if like it's supposed to be this jarring moment if they're a little bit older. And then I love the way that just with these characters, it's like, yeah, things are better now, but I'm older than like he is from Harry. And he's like, so I remember a time that I just couldn't be out. I knew something was strange about me and that I couldn't really explain it until later on. And how he just like, it made me feel rejected from society. But I know like things are better now. Like there was this moment of just being like, isn't it? And he's like, isn't it weird how like one like mistake or one feeling can take you back to that feeling as a kid? And that's the heartbreaking part. These conversations, which isn't like, there aren't wrapped around self pity. It's just knowing like this made me who I am.
Well, I think the emotional core of the movie and the core theme of it is, if you had to come up with a question, was how it's what Adam is asking himself is, how would parents have reacted to me coming out? They die when he's 13, and he knows that coming out for a gay man or a gay woman is a big part of like their evolution as a person.
Mhm.
And he doesn't seem like he has any friends that we are aware of in the movie.
No,
He's very isolated, but I'm sure he has had conversations with other gay men about their coming out. So he knows that there are things that are supposed to happen, but he never has that. And so there is this sensation Adam has that he is an incomplete gay man, I think.
Yeah.
There's that don't have a family to reveal myself to. So when I reveal myself to someone like Harry, that's not the same, right? Harry is a stranger
Yeah.
ultimately, but my parents are people I knew, and I don't know if they would have rejected me, if they would have accepted me. And then whenever Harry talks about what goes on in his family, where he came out, his family didn't reject him, but Harry does understand that he lives on like the periphery of his family now.
Yeah.
The hetero members of his family have gotten married, have children. He's still single.
Yeah.
He lives in London, and he's gay, and it makes him, he understands he's different from them, and there's an isolation that comes with that that's amplified by the setting of the movie, which is this big tower in London where it's only Adam and Harry living in it so far.
I mean, it kind of reminds me, and like we were talking once about a book that you'd read about how gay people or people within the queer community are forced to like run into heteronormal relationships
Mhm.
where it's supposed to be, well, you're supposed to get married, you're supposed to adopt or like have like do IVF in order to have children. You're supposed to move to the suburb, you're supposed to be monogamous, and you're supposed to fit into the same standards as a straight monogamous couple would be. And there is a reflection on that because when um Adam asks Harry, do you have friends around? Especially because both of them live in London. It is like this unspoken thing of like it's very expensive to live in London. Uh and it's also like the centerpiece of their universe, right? If you're gay, that's where you're supposed to possibly meet your partner. And he's like, yeah. And then he's like, no, not really. And then Harry asks Adam, like, do you have any friends? And he's like, all of them have moved and all of them have had families. And he's like, do you not want to have a family? He's like, it's kind of like there's a pause because he understands that that is what is supposed to be expected of him. But it's not like he's been revealing, like, oh, it was all my queer friends that went off and moved to like and had kids. It was just sort of like that just didn't pan out for him.
Well, I think even more so, it's Adam may have a family one day, but the problem is hasn't allowed himself to grieve the loss of his parents ever. And that happened when he was 13. And now, I mean, Andrew Scott, the actor, is 47, and I assume Adam's supposed to be around that age.
Yeah.
He's never allowed himself to grieve it. The image I came up with is that he's kind of holding his grief at arm's length because he doesn't want to endure how much it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
But as a result, it's caused him to become alienated and hurt even worse. And that the film is about him finally just grieving them. And at the end of the film, he has this moment of catharsis. He's able to finally come
Yeah.
through it. And we don't know what his future is going to be, but it's clear that there are more things available to him now than before when he was so trapped in this place he had created for
Yeah, and I
himself.
love the conversation about like the identity between Harry and Adam because Harry's supposed to be late 20s, much like Mescal's actual age, versus Adam, who's like in his mid going into late 40s, of how Harry identifies as queer and Adam is like, I know that we're supposed to say queer now, but so gotten used to saying that like I'm gay. And Harry's like, yeah, but didn't we ruin, well, the word gay was almost ruined for my generation.
Mm.
Like your book bag is gay, your water bottle is gay, or this is gay, that you're like queer feels more polite. And it feels like a genuine conversation that you would either hear between, your queer friends, or like you would actually read online of two queer people talking back and forth about their identities and how that's shifted over time. And even though it's okay to be queer, the question is of like, is it really at the end of the day?
Well, yeah, I think this film does a very good job of showing the marginalization of marginalized people,
Yeah.
and that's the loneliness of it. There's a quote I pulled from Harry where he said, "I know how easy it can be to stop caring about yourself."
Yes.
And you think about both of these men have kind of fallen into this sleepwalking pattern in their lives, which doesn't necessarily improve when they get together as a couple, because part of that is they start doing a lot more drugs together.
Mhm.
And that's where the film becomes this kind of very trippy sequence where we're not really sure when Adam is dreaming, when he's awake, if he's really on the train, if he's back in his bed in his apartment. And it's that sense of you feel so disconnected and disassociated from your physical self
Yes.
that you just, you stop bathing, you forget to eat, and you're just kind of existing as if you were a ghost.
Yeah, and I feel as if like either no matter your sexual identity, I feel like you can gravitate towards what Harry and Adam are saying. It's so easy when you get to a point to your life to stop wanting to take care of yourself because of how awful the rest of the world feels. And you think, oh, well, being gay is the most minor thing about it compared to like how it was before. But is this like, but you're also then discounting that the current generation doesn't have struggles to go through, or they're not combating something themselves, or that their families won't be an obstacle that they have to go through. Just because now parents are okay with it doesn't mean it's going to be open arms, willing to let your child be as queer as possible if you have other children that are fulfilling what you would thought was like the automatic response, right? A straight relationship or them getting married and having children. Like it is a question that even when like Adam is visiting his parents and opening into those ideas, that they start asking questions about that because they're just kind of like, what about the things that we hoped for you?
Oh, the book you had mentioned before, it was Conflict Is Not Harm by Sarah Schulman. And what she was saying was how, with the legalization of same-sex marriage in the States, it was a right that should always have been available to everyone. But what had happened in society was, in some social settings, it was becoming like an obligation. So if you were gay and you'd been in a relationship for a long time, then there was some assumption of, oh, now you'll get married, right? And you'll be monogamous and you might adopt children. When the idea of, well, no, because uh, homosexuality had been so marginalized, it had actually allowed people who were queer to be more free and fluid in the shape and structure of their relationships than heterosexual people who had been more confined.
Yeah.
And so what it was this like straight confinement was coming towards gay people to try to get them to just assimilate. And in the book, she was saying how like this is not fair to communities that have created alternatives that work for them. And if an alternative is
Yeah.
working for you, you shouldn't be forced
And
to
it's
have to
also
conform.
like you're losing a sense of community. There's always the question is like there are queer people that have been that joke being like, well, it's really hard for me to meet people that I'm attracted to because I don't want to go to a club. That's not my scene. I would rather meet someone in a quiet place and be it as whoever you are. Like you're like there are confinements, right? When you think about it, like not only are now you're saying to queer people, well, now you can get married, you can be monogamous, and you can forget about your community because now your community is going to be whatever suburb you decide to raise your children in.
Well, you think about it, it's another instance of binaries, right? Oh, well,
Mhm.
if you're gay, you're either going to get married and settle down, or you're going to go to the club every night and like do poppers, and that's what you're going to do. And when it's like, well, there's many other options here.
And I think it's like I forgot the film. It was like Rotting to Death. What was it?
Rotting in the sun.
I feel like that is another film that you could pair it with this one.
Two very different queer experiences.
But it's also very honest in the queer
Mhm.
experiences. Like neither one is going like this is the best version of the queer experience.
Well,
And
they're both made by middle-aged queer men who are able to look back on what they were doing and might be doing right now and sort of going, I'm kind of burnt out.
yeah.
I'm kind of exhausted from living that way. I kind of just want things to be calm and quiet. I would say it's a presentation of queer introversion.
Yeah.
That you in popular American media, especially, it's always like, queer as folk or images like that where they're at a club and they're dancing. And I think, no, there are gay people that probably just like hanging out at their house and playing video games.
Yeah,
Not doing anything.
like
I mean,
there
there's
was a joke online that like I saw someone say that like their boyfriend, he said like, oh, we were out, we hung out and like in the middle at 3 o'clock in the morning, we were at a McDonald's. He reaches over, holds my hand, and says, "We are never doing this again." Oh,
yeah.
like there are introverted queer
Yeah.
people out there.
Well, that's even though I don't necessarily care for her, Sarah Silverman, that one thing I did like about her show was Brian Posehn and Steve Agee as a same-sex couple who were bearded, big,
Metalhead.
metalhead video game nerds.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing some gay men talk online about how they were so happy for that kind of representation
Because
because
they
like
were
that's
that
me,
man.
that's me, that's the kind of,
That's
and I
me
never
my partner.
and I never see that type of person ever in media. That's
Yeah,
really
I
great.
think it's one that like I would like to see Black, like Indigenous people of color film like this. The only closest one that I can think is Moonlight, and even then, like they don't talk about queerness. It's just that's who
They do though.
yeah, it's like it's very light in comparison to
Well, I think in this movie the dialogue is more forward about it, and in Moonlight it's just kind of Barry Jenkins is a type of filmmaker who doesn't say, he shows.
yeah, and like I like Barry Jenkins I like because there is like a mood, right?
Yeah.
There's a feeling.
I'd say there's definitely a mood here.
But I think with this, just the writing is so good.
Well, it felt like real conversations that
Yes.
people were having. Let's get into each of there's 4 core actors here. We'll start with Andrew Scott. And I said before, I felt like he played it with very strong commitment. And I think this is a great contemporary example of when an actor completely disappears into a role.
Mhm.
Because I know this is not who Andrew Scott is in real life. He doesn't live alone in a tower in London, mourning the deaths of his parents and like daydreaming it. Like that's not who he is. But during the runtime of this movie, I believed that's who this was.
Yeah.
What did you think of his performance in this
I
one?
thought it was a great performance. I think that it's going to be a performance that will impact a lot of people. The Fleabag girlies are gonna be like, what about this? Because everybody always knew him as a priest, and that was like the I think for American audiences, that's where they knew him the best, unless you're a
I knew him as
person.
Moriarty.
Yes.
From Sherlock, yeah.
Did he was he on Doctor Who at some point? I feel like every person is on
Doctor Who's like the Law and Order of the UK,
Yeah,
where
like
at some point everybody's been on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say I've never been hugely impressed with him. I've never disliked any of his performances. But after this, I was like, oh wow, he is very good. And I don't know if it's because I'm in my 40s now, but when I see especially male actors in their 40s, like another one I was thinking is Uma Thurman's ex. I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Ethan Hawke.
Ethan Hawke. Seeing Ethan Hawke in movies now, I appreciate him far more than I did when I saw Ethan Hawke when he was in his 20s.
Yeah.
And I just think there's something about when you have lived life and you've experienced some things, what you're able to bring to a role that's age appropriate for you. We're not talking like Tom Cruise kind of
Yeah.
thing, where he never plays age appropriate characters. But like this is so perfect because it's like Andrew Scott is informed by his own life as a gay man, but he's also interpreting Haig's script and creating something out of
Is
that.
he gay?
Andrew Scott, yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Very gay. Yeah, there was a whole thing where there was like an actor roundtable, and he was talking about how irritating is to him the term openly gay.
Oh,
Because he
yeah.
goes, we don't say anyone's openly straight. We don't use that adjective in any other circumstance.
Yeah.
And I think that came from him as a gay man. Yeah, I'm fairly sure he is gay.
I mean, I like that we're getting to a point in media that it doesn't matter if the actor or actress is bi or like gay or lesbian, that the people are just like they're just hot. Like kind of situation.
You made me have to double check.
Okay.
Yes, he is out. So
Okay.
yeah, I was right.
Okay.
Never question me. I know all the sexualities of all the actors. So then we come to the other half of the sort of dual performance here, which is Paul Mescal as Harry. Previously, the only movie I can remember seeing him in was
The REM song.
this is the REM song. That's not the name of the movie, darling.
After Sun?
After Sun, yes. After Sun. And I know you've seen Normal People.
Yes.
So for me, After Sun is my only experience with Paul Mescal as an actor, and I thought he was very good in that. And I think he continued that here. I think what Paul Mescal is very good at playing are people who are trying to keep smiling, but the pain is just too much at a certain point.
Perfect, because like in Normal People, like his character gets depression and tries to talk about it,
And I mean,
but can't.
so that means all three of these roles are about people who become horribly depressed.
Yes, and the thing is, like, there was certain like feminine gestures and a little bit in his tone that it wasn't cartoonish. Because I noticed that when like Harry and Adam are like talking at some point, and the lighting is so fucking beautiful. Like he looks like he's shimmering, and like he touches Adam in a way that doesn't feel like the masculine way of like that you would touch someone.
It's that sort of feminine flamboyance that often gets exaggerated about gay people in other
It
media.
was very subtle in this performance. Like I feel like if it had been a little bit more, then it would have not been good. It was just enough like that it worked.
Well, that's why, like, whenever I'll see queer media and it's queer men and they're engaged in like sexual activity and they're being very like physically aggressive with each other, being someone who's straight, like, I'm always like, that just doesn't seem very nice.
Yeah.
But then you see something like this where it's more like it does look like the way a couple would actually interact with each other, where there's the touch, the holding people. And I'm like, okay, that feels to me what I would think is more accurate. I mean, I'm sure both have their place, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he did a very good job of playing, and I do not believe Paul Mescal is gay. Is he bisexual? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, he's never really like.
Didn't he date Phoebe Bridgers at some point?
Yeah, he did.
She left him for Bo Burnham.
Oh,
She loves
God.
depressed boys.
Sad man with sad blue eyes, I guess.
And he was very believable as that character, and
Yeah.
I liked how he didn't. Like I said, this isn't this sort of exaggerated caricature of gay men. This feels like, oh, real people who are gay.
Yeah.
And then we have the parents' performances. So Jamie Bell, I mean, I remember seeing Jamie Bell in Billy Elliot 24 years ago when I was in college. That makes me feel kind of old. And then Claire Foy, I know she was in The Crown, but I never saw that. And I can't recall if I've ever seen her in anything.
The wife of
First Man.
Yes. This movie.
Neil Armstrong, right?
Yeah.
I don't really remember much of her in that movie because it was so focused on Ryan Gosling's character. So she was very much playing like the wife character. So this is the first time I really feel like I saw Claire Foy as an actress really giving a bigger performance. And I think my favorite scene with her is the coming out scene with Adam. I think you get to see such range from her in that scene.
Yeah.
Because there's always a question when you're going to have a scene like that, especially in a movie like this where the mom and the dad are supposed to be likable characters, right?
Yeah.
He loves them, and so as the audience, we are supposed to love them.
Mm-hmm.
And my thing that I absolutely love is Andrew Haig's writing and her performance as they allow her to come up to the edge of becoming someone you don't like.
Yeah.
Because she has a reaction to her son being gay that is appropriate to someone who died in 1987.
Yes.
She gets a look of immediate concern on her face. She does not look happy about this. She does not look joyful that her son is telling her this. And then very shortly into the conversation, she brings up AIDS. And you think 1987? Yeah, that you would have been talking about AIDS. And she is just so worried about. She isn't mad that he's gay, and she's not telling him not to be gay. What it is she's so afraid for him of how the world will treat
Yeah,
him.
she's basically like indicating you're making your life harder by doing this. And
Well, then also the question is of, well, how long have you been gay? It's that not understanding, and he's just like,
like it was just a
yeah,
decision
yeah,
out
yeah.
of nowhere. He was bored. I think my favorite scene between them is when they're having a conversation of what happened after their passing.
Oh, was that at the American Diner at the mall?
No, it's
Okay.
when he
Was that like Christmas Day?
I think it was around the Christmas
Yeah.
time. Like I don't want to like detail too
Hmm.
much, but that conversation was just like heartbreaking. And the way that she just absorbs everything that he's saying, and then it begins to just remark about how she was as a mother.
Well, I liked going back to the coming out scene. That was the scene where he goes, "Things are different now." But what I loved about that was he says things are different now, but then the look on Andrew Scott's face is immediately like, without saying the words, you can read it. He's saying, "But are they better? They're different.
Yeah.
They certainly are different." And I think that's something that a lot of older gay people are probably having those thoughts and conversations amongst themselves of, it certainly is different, and coming out seems to be a thing that more people can do now. But is it better now? I
Yeah.
saw someone just this week, because of the horrible tragedy in Oklahoma with Nex Benedict being murdered by their classmates, and then the entire, like, all the authority figures in Oklahoma completely being utter shit in the wake
Yeah.
of this. Someone saying, and with someone, I think they were probably around my age, but gay, saying that, their whole life they've been told, oh, it gets better, it gets better. And they're like, when? When does it get better? Because it doesn't seem like it's getting better for enough people fast enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we have, Andrew Haig, he's not making a Marvel movie here. He's not going to hit you over the head with the theme of the movie. There's going to be questions that are unspoken in the film, but implied through reactions, through performances. And Scott's face in that scene is asking that question of, it's different now, but do I feel safer? Can I be who I am everywhere I go?
Yeah, I think it's also this thing of like, if you have enough empathy when you are a marginalized person and you start to question to yourself of all the difficulties that you've gone through in your life and wonder if that thing that you are marginalized for was the hindrance, was the cause of your loneliness, or was the cause of your poverty, or was the cause of your missed opportunities. Like you can have empathy for like Black, Indigenous people of color. You can have like empathy for disabled people if you have that mindset, because yeah, things are supposed to be better, but again, what about for those who are just coming to terms with their life now? I'm not going to go like, well, in the 80s, you would have been severely fucked. So you should just be happy with what you have now.
Well, yeah, that's the same horrible liberal mindset that you see when people talk about not wanting to vote for Biden because he supports genocide, and then they're threatened with, well, when they start hauling you off to the camps, don't ask me for help.
It's also
Where you're like, so are things better, or have you just gotten quieter about your hate and your prejudice?
it's also like this thing of it being like, did we just get used to what we were given?
Yeah. And it's one of those where maybe it is easier to come out as a gay person, but another thing that a gay person is going to experience that everyone else is experiencing is a crumbling economy and less opportunities to lift yourself up out of poverty.
Yeah.
So it's like, great, I can come out, but especially if you think about like the UK right now. Yeah, you could be a gay person who's out, but if you look around at the landscape around you, it's looking pretty bleak.
Yeah.
Um, and we have Jamie Bell's performance as the dad. What did you think of his?
I thought it was a good performance. It wasn't asking a lot out of him in comparison.
I think what he impressed me the most about him is how well he captured the age of that character.
Yes.
He felt, even though Andrew Scott is like over a decade older than Jamie Bell, who plays Adam.
Okay.
So Jamie Bell, in his performance as the dad, felt fatherly. He felt like he was older than Scott, which is also part of Scott making choices in that performance to play himself as more innocent and naive in the presence of his parents, more childlike, but not in a way that's like exaggerated. I think it's very subtle the way he chooses to be like, there's a gentleness in him with his parents.
Yeah, I think that's like something that a lot of times if we don't notice that we can be towards our towards our parents, like we can feel reduced to being a child around them. And it made sense because there's like the way that he's also just being like kind of cautious, just trying to like tiptoe as to what the conversation's going to be before, like he doesn't want to make them mad. He just is
When he doesn't want
wants
to,
them to stay.
yeah, he doesn't want to rush through this. He wants this to last for as long as he can make it last.
Yeah.
Uh, so I would say it's a film that's grounded in the emotions of the story,
Yes.
but it never pulls at the audience's heartstrings in a manipulative way. So it earns those tears at the end. And to
Mhm.
me, that's the mark of a great humanist filmmaker. So that reminds me of someone like a Vittoria De Sica who made Bicycle Thieves,
Yeah.
or maybe a little Michelangelo Antonioni without being so bleak,
Yeah.
but very much about like this film is centered on these characters and what they're feeling and how feeling that causes them to go through this emotional arc, and they are changed at the end.
Yes.
It has a very hopeful ending. It's still a bittersweet ending, and that I really love that he did that. That's the same way with like Lean on Pete and even Weekend too, right?
Yeah.
They're happy endings, but there's also a loss, and you kind of have to like but which is very reflective of life, right? Like you're never just going to get some sunny and everything was fine. It
Yeah.
was life is almost about learning to accept that this change is happening and it is here and there's not much I can do about it, but I'm still alive. I'm still in the world. Things are still happening around me.
Yeah.
Uh, would you recommend All of Us Strangers just to a whole general audience?
Yes. It immediately go watch it.
Yeah, like when I get so mad about theaters being filled with very corporate Hollywood algorithmic garbage, these are the kind of movies I wish that we had more of on those screens
Yes.
to balance it out. I'm not saying you gotta not make Marvel movies anymore, but we don't need that Marvel movie on 7 out of 15 screens in a multiplex, right?
Yeah.
There's throws things like this up there, and there's an audience who wants to see this. And it is even though it's a queer film, it's very much about the queer experience, but it's something that I feel everyone can find a
Yeah.
touchstone to relate to in it. And to me, it really signifies that Andrew Haigh is like one of our great working filmmakers today. The Iron Claw tells the story of the Von Erich brothers as they make history in the highly competitive world of professional wrestling in the early 1980s. Through tragedy and triumph, the brothers seek larger-than-life immortality on the biggest stage in sports. Ariana, this is, once again, we did have an episode of thirds. This is the third film we've seen from Sean Durkin.
Okay.
Previously, we had seen his debut feature, Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene. That was also Elizabeth Olsen's debut feature, I believe, her second feature. We saw The Nest, which there's a decade between those movies.
Yes.
The Nest starred Jude Law and Carrie Coon. And very shortly, just a handful of years after that, we get The Iron Claw. What do you think of Sean Durkin as a director?
I do love that he's very versatile. There is a different feeling to each film. And Marcy
Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene.
we did a submergent tank viewing on that.
That was the first and only film so far where I've done a cinematic immersion tank with, which was an idea that Matt Sloan of Beer and Board Games presented, which was you take one movie and you watch it for 5 consecutive days, one viewing each day, and each viewing you jot down your notes. And I would say doing that caused that movie to be elevated to a 5-star movie for me.
Yeah.
Because it's just the amount of detail that is in the script, that is in the performances, that's in his direction. and how each viewing of that movie really enriched it even more and made me appreciate it even more, and made me a big fan. And
Yeah.
which, when you become a big fan of a movie like that, it's frustrating because you don't know you're going to have to wait 10 years for the next movie.
That is very true.
So it was like 2010 was when Martha came out, and then 2020 was when The Nest came out.
Yes.
And so hopefully we don't have to wait longer for his movies from now on. Every few years, hopefully we'll be getting them. What did you think about the Iron Claw specifically, just in general?
So story-wise, I was like, we had a talk because after every movie, Seth puts them in the letterbox and we talk about what the scoring should be. Story-wise, I felt like it was a 3.5, but I think it's because I kind of had problems with Zac Efron's acting. It was a little stiff, and I don't know if it had to do with the fact that like maybe I'm just I should be a little
I'm gonna say that. I I've I've thought about this, and I think you're wrong. Yeah, you're just wrong. But
but visually,
mhm.
visually this is a 4.5 film.
Oh, I mean, the visuals are. The opening of the movie reminded me of Raging Bull.
Yes, and then the fucking transitions. This motherfucker was pulling out all the stops. There was like transparent filming of like the fucking three brothers, then the dad,
Calm down, calm down.
and then like angles that were like bird eye view at sometimes.
Well, we're getting there. There's a lot to talk about here.
Yes.
So, first of all, I think the reason why the story didn't compel you as much is ultimately this is a biopic,
Yeah.
and it is following fairly close to the biopic formula. It's sort of, here are things, the important things that happen in the order that they happen.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a chunk in the middle where it does feel like we're kind of moving fast through time.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the pace of the movie kind of stops and starts a lot.
Yeah.
In terms of influences, I kept thinking it reminded me of movies from the 70s.
Yes, it
And
had like that slow pace.
Where like the camera, there's like a distance with the camera. I also remember that in Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, and The Nest, where he's not a huge fan of a close-up unless you absolutely need it.
Yeah, and so I think it forces the actors to use their full bodies for the scenes.
Well, and you pointed out, and I think you were very right, because I said, I'm wondering what director would you compare this to? And you said Robert Altman. And I think when people think of Robert Altman, they often think of big, sprawling. I mean, and now I think about it, this is a big ensemble cast movie, right? It doesn't have some of the Altman tropes, like people talking over each other, right? That's not there. I didn't get the sense there was a lot of improvisation in this movie. Maybe in the wrestling scenes there might have been some, but they were also very choreographed. I think it was in that distance. Altman would sometimes almost create like a documentarian's distance.
Yeah.
You think about like The Long Goodbye, you think about The Player that we recently watched, where the audience is the camera and we are outside of this and we're observing. It's that very voyeuristic kind of sense. We mentioned Raging Bull. I think structural or thematically, it's very much like Shakespeare's King Lear, where you have the king at the center who has his children, and it's but it's almost a reverse, where in King Lear, he is a very arrogant, dumb asshole and kind of gets what he deserves. But it's also, who of my heirs is deserving to sit in my throne is kind of what's going on here. But I also think you pointed out, we looked at Durkin was one of the filmmakers that voted in Sight and Sound's most recent poll about like the 100 greatest movies or 50 greatest movies, whatever list they did. And he put Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter on his list. And I do think that's another influence on him. That kind of a movie where The Deer Hunter, to me, the way it feels, it doesn't feel like a copy of something, but it also doesn't feel the way other movies from the 70s feel. It's just this thing that kind of, I don't know, it's one of those where you're so used to with the auteur theory where, oh, these directors, you think of a Baz Luhrmann, for example, puts big flourishes and signatures all over their movies, so there's no doubt who made it. Michael Cimino's movies, I don't feel a connection to who the director is, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just feels like this is piece of cinema that someone really took a lot of time and care with and
Yeah, it
crafted.
feels like people who really love novels.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there's a sense of like with Martin Scorsese, and then when I think about The Deer Hunter, it feels like something that you would read in an actual novel. Like, and then you got to the point that you're just like, no, 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 I've met people like this, or no, that makes perfect sense. Like The Deer Hunter, when it's like, what was it? They come home from the war. There's a huge party going about. Like there are all these people that are talking to each other. We've known each other since we're children. What are you doing with your life? Like, what's your update? And then trying to integrate yourself back into
The passage of time.
yes.
One thing I do think this movie could have used from something like The Deer Hunter is The Deer Hunter had sequences. So like the wedding is a long sequence inside that movie,
Yeah.
while other parts of that movie are kind of jumping through time. And I don't feel like this movie ever paused long enough in a single sequence to really let it stretch and breathe and come to life.
Mm-hmm.
It did feel like we were moving a little faster in moments than I would have liked. We get close to that, like when they take Mikey to the college to do his band's performance.
Yes.
And that does feel like a series of scenes that are interlinked to make a sequence, but it's just not long enough.
Yeah.
Like I would have rather we kind of just pause, slow down, and really just let that scene expand and just see these brothers interacting with each other. They don't have to be doing or saying anything of great import, but just seeing them play off of each other would add to the investment I have in this family.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, and it's not as if like there is a lack of the brothers bonding with one another. I think it's such a large cast that you feel as if you're missing pieces
And
with,
so many things happen.
and so many things do happen because one of the things is like, oh, Kevin and Mike and like what was the other brother? I forgot.
There's David and Carrie.
David, no, Carrie, and like they go pick up the youngest one who's like at band practice.
Well, so that would be Kevin, Carrie, and David.
Yes.
Pick up Mikey.
Yeah, they go pick him up, and he's just like, because Carrie's not there. Like he's like he's off to be an Olympian. And then he's mentioned at the beginning of the film when the dad's like, there's rankings between my sons.
We're talking about that. I do think it was weird that Carrie doesn't come into the movie until like we're like a quarter of the way in.
Yeah.
Because while Jeremy Allen White is very good in this role, it just that character kind of enters into a series of relationships that the film has already established.
Yeah.
And it clearly communicates he has relationships that are established with them, but as a member of the audience, it's a little jarring at first to try to figure out where does he fit in this.
I think it also had to do, it just felt like he was like Carrie was replacing Dave. Like,
well, he didn't come back until David was still with us when Carrie came in.
But it probably was his understanding as screenwriters and directors, like there's too many characters.
Well, let's step back and talk about that. I did a little research about the Von Erich family as they were real wrestlers. And so what Sean Durkin did was he softened this movie, I think, to make it a little less overwhelming, because in reality, there were 6 brothers. And by the time Fritz Von Erich died in 1997, 5 of his 6 sons were dead, 3 of them by suicide.
Yeah.
So we see 2 suicides in the movie, but there was a third one who shot himself in the head with a 9mm.
Yeah.
And I think from a screenwriting point of view, you could also say, well, that is repetitive to have that many suicides unless you have some sort of thematic note that can tie them together. And there's so much tragedy in the movie as it is that I don't necessarily think you needed that third suicide. It would have been kind of redundant, in a way, from a story perspective. But I do feel that the film, even though it's set in the early 80s, does feel like a very important film for right now.
Yeah.
Because at its core, it is showing how masculinity is seen as a defense against the pain of the human condition.
Yes.
But by relying so much on like raw masculinity, that is what leads to these men dying. Whether it's David pushing himself harder than he should, or it's other members of the family having severe emotional, psychological crises and not seeking help and resulting in killing themselves.
Yeah, because the film basically portrays 5 brothers versus the 6, right? Because there's like the
There was
youngest,
there's the 5th one in the movie is
the
spoken
oldest
about, but
one.
never, we don't see him until the end as like a ghost.
Well, we see him towards the beginning. We just don't know that like he is passed.
Is that him?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't. Yeah, okay, yeah.
And so I think like there's also the little bit of the messiness of the film, which is, again, it's not saying it's a great film. It starts with like, well, it's like a narration of sorts.
Well, it starts with Fritz in the 60s at a competition, and he's
But like after that, like there's like a voiceover. The character just being like, "Oh, my family." There's there's a
Kevin?
yes. And
Was
like,
that I don't, yeah, at some point he does kind of explain his family, yeah.
and like at the beginning, only for it to be explained again when he's having a conversation with Pam.
Yeah, there are places where it just feels like we're kind of overemphasizing something that I understood.
And I think it was probably done once they realized like how big this film was going to be. Besides just like Zac Efron, it was like we have Jeremy White who's becoming huge, so we're degenerate, like a general audience is going to come in. So we need to be very clear that this is cursed.
I can see that being kind of like studio led, because I'd say of Durkin's 3 movies, this is the most normie movie, you would say. Yeah. His other 2 movies I think would be harder for people who are used to more traditional American movies to get into. They're still accessible. They're just denser, I think. We were talking, I also think the film is also about capitalism.
Yeah.
Because the way Fritz runs his home is he is very open about the fact that he ranks his sons to them. And it is this winners losers mindset of capitalism, which is often done by reactionary minded people with the idea that, oh no, by putting them through this competition that's completely unnecessary, it will forge them into strong people.
Yeah.
And the film is all about showing you how the antithesis of that happens. That by making his sons compete for his love, by attending funerals of their own brothers and being told not to cry as adult men.
Don't wear sunglasses, but also don't cry.
Yeah. That he had already killed his family before his boys had died. Because they don't have, like, they have hearts, but they don't have souls. They don't know how to live because he has them all live at home. They're all virgins. Like, that's I mean, we know Kevin for sure is, and I have a feeling everyone else is.
Until maybe one moves out.
Yeah. And they are so repressed. And you have to wonder, what did he think this was going to work? I mean, I guess he did because he stuck to it. Or was he so deep in the hole of having forced his family to do this that he just couldn't relent at a certain point? Because the pain of being proven wrong, as so many men show us, is too much for them to bear. They would rather die than be proven wrong.
Yeah.
He's also, he doesn't see his children as people. They're his weapons in his war against the world that he believes didn't give him what he deserved.
Yeah, they're an extension of him.
And so that's why he never really sees them as people. They're just these play pieces on a board that he moves around in order to make himself more money, to make himself more powerful, to grow his business.
Yeah, and then there's also like, I love the performance of the mom.
Maura Tierney. Yeah.
It's because like I liked at some point she's fixing her hair, she's about to go out, and Kevin comes in and is like, "Hey, dad is too hard on Mike. You have to talk to him." And she's like, "That is a problem between you guys." Like, first of all, like he's like, "Hey, can I talk to you?" He's like, "That's what you have your brothers for."
Yeah, that was so disturbing to me, that line.
And then because there is like this clear indication that there are the 2 parents and there are the boys. And the boys take care of themselves. Mom will provide food. If you're sick, maybe she'll take care of you. But emotionally,
yeah, there's nothing.
Like, you have to take care of each other. I'm not involved.
Well, that goes back to the opening scene of the movie where Fritz is making big decisions without consulting Doris. And I think you see the seeds planted and then come to fruition in the 80s where she is checked out. And there's that scene where she talks about with Mike. Ugh, poor Mike. Mike is, of all the characters, Mike made me the saddest. Uh, where she's talking to Mike and she points out the painting on the wall that she painted. And she's never told any of her sons that she painted it or that she knows how to paint.
Like, he's like, why did you? He's like, I thought you guys would make fun of me.
Well, and then that's reflected in Fritz, who she reveals whenever Pam comes over for like dinner at their house, about how Fritz, the patriarch, was originally a clarinetist in college.
Classically trained.
Yeah. And then switched to football. But then he, of course, believes there was, conspiracy against him by people at the college to make him fail at football. But then he took his athleticism and turned that into this wrestling thing. And then you have Mike, who his passion is music.
Yeah.
And we can see where he gets that from. His parents are artists who have repressed their own creativity in order to just engage in this mindless like commerce.
Yeah, because you think about it, they're like at two ends of what makes America horrendous. You have like this capitalist, like macho filled man, and then you have a woman who has checked herself out to just pray when things don't feel good. Just pray.
Yeah, she doesn't
Like
do anything.
she gives up all her power between her husband and God.
Yeah.
No decisions are hers.
And it's as a result, so when you get to the end of the movie and the family is just lying in ruins, she checks out even further. And I think that was that was one of those scenes that I think Durkin excels at, is it's a scene with not a lot of dialogue, but there's a lot of subtext in scenes. And the way he chooses to shoot, which we'll talk about that very soon, it brings more out of a scene than I think a lot of other directors would get out of it.
Yeah.
In a simple scene where, Fritz comes in and asks where dinner is. She tells him she hasn't made it, and he sits down at a table. Most directors are not going to shoot that scene in a very interesting way. It'll just it'll communicate the idea. But he communicates the idea plus adds so much artistry to it.
Yeah.
Where it's where the camera is and how you can't see her when Fritz comes in that room.
Mm-hmm.
And he speaks to her off panel, and then how the camera pushes in and kind of comes around the corner of the door to reveal that she's sitting there in front of an easel painting for the first time in God knows how long.
Yeah.
And
then she indicates, I'm not hungry.
Yeah. And she's like, if I'm not hungry, I'm not making food, which is a big step for her. The way the film was shot, one of the things that I love about Sean Durkin is there's a lot of scenes in movies that you can see other directors not put too much thought into. They put thought into every scene, but sometimes it's just sort of, where can I put the camera? Maybe in two different places. We're going to do a mid shot, maybe a close up, just get enough coverage, and then we move on to the next scene. An example of how he takes a scene that could be done very blandly and makes it interesting, the Kevin and Pam in the car sex scene.
Yeah.
Where they come out of the fraternity where Mikey's band is playing, and they get in the car, and it's all shot in a side view silhouette of their faces.
Mm-hmm.
And it has all these different things going on by doing that. It makes us focus on the outline of their faces, so we start to take in more detail than we might otherwise. It's because they're completely in shadow, it emphasizes the intimacy of the moment. They're kind of hidden from us.
Yeah.
And it also makes us not focus on the details of their bodies, but on their interaction with each other more than their hair, their eyes. We can't see any of those things. They're obscured by the shadow. I really like that. The way, I won't say whose, but the way there's a certain suicide scene and the way that scene is composed, intercutting between the person taking all the steps to ensure that they will die, intercut with the family walking the property trying to find the body.
My favorite was like this light that is almost like a reflection of the flashlight that person is holding, and you could see it like reflected in like one of the windows of the house.
Yeah,
it is just so well done.
Yeah, and so I think it's an elevated biopic that is still hindered by the structures and tropes of the biopic in America a little bit.
I think it's almost as if the director just decided, all right, I'm going to make a film that's going to be for a grander audience. How do I keep their attention without having to marvel this up?
Yeah.
And it
Actually put some artistry into it.
yes, and visually, I did not look away from this film. At no point did I feel it was visually boring. I love the way that also like the wrestling matches were shot because it was way different from like the scenes of like their just day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
Where
It kind of recreated like the television camera effect,
yeah,
but was still cinematic.
yes. And so there were shots that felt like you were sitting with the presenters that they were marking the like the film to the people that were closer to the stage. It was rare moments where you actually close to the wrestlers, and if you were, it was like a focus on what was occurring to their bodies at that time. What was their reaction during that time?
That's what's very similar to Raging Bull.
Yes.
In that Scorsese was so keen on filming the physicality of the fight
Yes.
and making it a very like textured experience for the audience. Like you felt what it was like to be in that ring. You felt like it was to be in that audience watching.
Yeah.
The scene where Kevin gets that big injury near the end. Or no, that's not near the end. That's kind of the injury that kind of sidelines him.
Yeah.
The way that was shot when he's knocked out of the ring
Yeah.
and how the entire arena goes away and it's just Kevin on the ground and he can't move. I thought like once again, that was another just so much thought put into what that was going to look like.
Mhm.
There is a actor in here who is completely wasted though.
Who?
Lily James.
Yeah, she was.
I don't think he does anything interesting with her. I think she's there. She plays Kevin's wife and she
Mhm.
does wife things, but I didn't find her to be very interestingly written.
No.
I think Lily James is a good actress, but I don't think there wasn't an angle to that role that made her compelling to me.
No, she didn't stand out. Mind you, when the camera was far away, she did great, like with her body language. She was also a sign for Kevin that his life did not have to be this way.
But again, that makes she's
But-
not a person.
Yeah, again, she is there as a support because it's like there to remind him that this is not his entire life.
She's Kevin's arc.
Yes, but it can be a problem, but I think it just like there's just too many characters.
In the context of this movie, she was never going to have a major role, I don't think.
No.
Just because the film is about the brothers. That's
Yeah.
who this is. Because I mean, you think the Iron Claw, 5 fingers, 5 brothers, like that's who they are. The Von Erichs are the Iron Claw.
Yeah.
And at the end of the movie, there is no claw left because all the fingers are broken, essentially.
Yeah.
I think it also did a really good job of showing the line between performance and actual physicality of professional wrestling.
Yes.
Because I think it's safe to say that professional wrestling, while the rivalries and the personas are larger than life and often theatrical, the physicality that goes on is real. Like they do have to be in very good shape. There is a big possibility they can get injured.
Yeah, you have to learn how to fall properly. You have to learn how to take a beating properly.
Because it's like improvised choreography
Yeah.
almost. And so there are names for moves. There you go over what's going to happen generally with your opponent. But then when you get into the ring, there becomes these opportunities for harm to occur.
Yeah.
And the movie did such a good job of showing that.
I also really like the way that like Kevin, the character, explains like wrestling to like Pam.
Yeah.
Because she's like, oh, it's it's supposed to be fake, and like, so how do you move up? And he's like, well, it's not really fake. Like, yeah, we coordinate, but it's like, I like basically depending on my performance, I get promoted. And depending on how well I do, I'm able to move up. Is like it has nothing to do with the fact that it's fake. It's just how much can I get the crowd?
Professional wrestling is like if capitalism invented acting.
Yeah.
right? Like you have to act good enough to become more famous.
Yeah, and it's also this interesting thing that like we have seen within the past few years, there are a few wrestlers that happen to be socialists and communists because they know that like this is, as most sports, you're ruining your body for
Well,
this sport.
you're a commodity that the people in charge are willing to run into the ground.
Yes, and therefore like they should be taken care of. They should have like a pension that afterwards they're able to retire or do a job that doesn't make such demands on their physical lives afterwards.
Um, so we'll kind of we talked a little bit about some of the acting, but let's get in more detail because you had mentioned you thought Zac Efron's performance was weak. And the more I've thought about that, the more I've realized I don't think that's the case. I think his performance was actually strong. What's going on is the people they're playing are dense people.
Like
They are
he's stunted.
these are people who they don't regularly think on that deep of a level because they've been conditioned that way by their father.
Or
It's
basically like
it's everything is very binary. It's I am here and I need to get here, and to get there, I brute force my way there.
yeah, it's also like they never had to articulate how they felt or
Because
certain things in their life because
they're
like
told not to cry at
yeah,
funerals.
because like
Yeah.
for example, Kevin can explain to Pam what wrestling is.
That's where he's the most articulate.
But like he can't explain beyond what it is, why he wants to spend so much time with his brothers. But
Well, when he has sex with her, he becomes incredibly childlike and is fumbling.
yeah,
And it's because it's things outside of the very narrow, rigid experience that these brothers have had reveal them to be the adult children that they are.
yeah, like when the first time they encounter and they happen to be flirting and she's way more forward than he.
And he has to directly ask, "Are you asking me out on a date?"
Yeah.
Because he cannot read her that way. The brother who seems the most worldly, surprisingly, seemed to me was Mike.
Yeah.
Because he wants to do music. He's not interested in the wrestling. And I think that's what makes his arc hurt so bad in the movie, is because he didn't even want to do any of this stuff.
No, he was
And his
just
life is
told to.
ruined.
And it's like this interesting thing that not only that he probably has more ways to express himself because he is in a band
He's
that are
writing,
outside of his brothers.
and he's writing music. So he is expressing his emotions in some way.
Yeah, and it's like it is a touching scene of sorts when Mike is sort of like he gets basically like an entry point when the mom mentions that the dad was classically trained and he's like, "Oh, I've been actually doing music." And then he's like, we actually have somewhere to be and like but it happens to be tonight." And the mom's like, "No, you're not going." Only to see like that is the moment that you see like the brothers truly love each other because they go, well, we're going to sneak him out and we're going to take him to the party.
Well, and you realize like that's the bond that the brothers have. They're there for each other. They're not there to follow their parents' rules. They follow their parents' rules because they have been taught those rules are going to lead to something, but they also know, well, when my brother needs me, I'll do it regardless of what I'm told.
Yeah, especially like it's this contradiction that whether the mom wants to admit it or not, you told like your eldest son, deal with it amongst yourselves.
And
You're
so they
supposed
do.
to take care of yourselves, only for rules to be set upon when you don't like it. They're going to go turn around and break those rules.
So we'll say the three main brothers, because I would say Mike isn't necessarily one of the main brothers. Among the main brothers, that's Kevin, Carey, and David, who are Zac Efron, Jeremy Allen White, and Harris Dickinson, respectively. Of those three, which did you feel was the standout performance? Was there one that you weren't expecting to be wowed by, and you were like, "Oh wow, they're pretty good"?
I think
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, me too.
Because it's like he did so well. Like, of course, he's outperforming Kevin, but I love the way that like the character's not played as being super macho towards his own brother. Instead, he's kind of like, I'm sorry. I didn't know. And I loved also like the dynamic between them that when Kevin just admits, I didn't even want this. I didn't even want it that badly.
But he was just that was the position he was put in.
Just like, but dad wants it, so I just want to make him proud. And those conversations felt a little bit more closer to home versus the conversations that like Carrie and Kevin had, which were more like gruff boys. Like,
Do you remember? You know where you've seen Harris Dickinson before?
where?
The Triangle of Sadness. He's the main guy in that movie.
Oh.
And also he was in Where the Crawdads Sing, which was one of the Patreon picks we got.
Yeah,
So
the movie that we watched at half point, I don't know,
I
like
think I sped
faster.
it up. Yeah. Because I was like, because it's over 2 hours, and I'm like, I can't do this for over 2 hours. But yeah, he's one of those actors who he's clearly very up and coming. And I think there's a lot of potential for him. I don't quite think we've seen the role yet. And that's so often with these kinds of actors is you can get the sense that like, okay, there's something there, but he's waiting for that right director, that right script, and then you really see them shine.
Yeah.
What did you think of Holt McCallany as Fritz von Erich?
I thought he did a great job. Like,
That's a
what?
hard role.
Yeah, because I'm sure you want to play the likable character, but that, like, a lot of times you're just like, oh, fuck this dude.
You can't make him too cartoonish because that kills any realism in the movie.
Yeah, like the thing is, like when he's giving off the rankings, he's not doing it in a gruff voice. He's selling it to you.
He walks that line between being just someone you wish was dead and someone where you're like, there's still this human being, but their view of the world is just so warped and fucked up.
Like the way he's just like, I'm just giving you the rankings. And by the way, guys, like the rankings can change. If you work hard enough, like my love will be given to you even more. And it's like this odd positive spin, which you shouldn't do with your kids to begin with.
That's how he has to sell it to them, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're not going to buy in. I love that Durkin chose not to lean into sentimentality. And what that does is it creates this quiet tension throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Especially between Kevin and Fritz, where there's so many things that aren't said until the end of the film, but you feel from like minute one when Zac Efron comes on screen with his dad. And I like in the ending how through Kevin's children, they reveal to him that they can become better, happier people than what his father turned his brothers into.
Yeah.
Because that's an unspoken worry you can tell of Kevin is, am I going to recreate the curse that they talk about?
Yeah, like we see them when they're about to get their child's birth certificate, and he's like, no, I'm going with like
Adkison,
which is like my real name. I'm not gonna have, and like his like Pam, his wife, the whole time is like, it's a mindset, it's not the real thing. I think like Pam might not have like much of a character arc, but she is kind of like there being like, it's not you, it's your father.
Like
it's not the curse, it's your dad.
Like I can't imagine the movie without her in it, but I also don't think that Lily James was given a role that people are going to remember her for.
No, it's like she's there to be like, I don't believe in curses, I don't believe in fate, I don't believe in luck. And she's the one that's underlining that to Kevin when Kevin is so depressed that he can't help take care of his newborn child. She has to yell at him to snap at it because he's like in his own head.
He starts regressing where he wants to go back home and live with his parents, and he's a married man with a child.
Yeah, and she's like, you need to come back home or we're just not going to be together. Like, I can't do this. And I think it is touching when he just commits to his family.
Yeah.
When he's fully committed and it's just sort of like, this is what I'm going to do. And it's also like this fucked up thing when the dad is kind of like, well, what do you mean you want to do this? He's like, I've got my own family. And his father doesn't relent.
Would you recommend The Iron Claw to just a general audience?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is about as close as I think we come to a normie movie that we would say is a great piece of cinema. And I think that's Sean Durkin. He wrote the script, he directed it, and I think it's because of him. He took something that could have been a very forgettable
or too convoluted, depending on how many people were involved,
and turns it into something that is a great film.
Yeah.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out the show notes for links to reviews on popcult.blog. Make sure that you subscribe wherever it is that you listen to podcasts so you'll be notified when new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find that we're wrapping up our February series of movies about movies. We'll be finishing that out this week with 2 documentaries. This film is not yet rated, which is about exposing America's film censorship board, and A Decade Under the Influence, which is a retrospective talking about films of the 1970s. In March, we're actually going to kind of continue with documentaries for the first half of that month. We're going to be doing a series on the films of Frederick Wiseman. He's a documentary filmmaker whose breakout film, The Titicut Follies, chronicled life inside of a Massachusetts mental asylum. And he focused his career on making films about America's institutions and kind of taking them in and editing his films in a way to say something about what these institutions mean to American society. Next week on our podcast, we will be reviewing another 2 movies that I've been anticipating since 2023, and that will be Mamawati, an African film, and Poor Things, Yorgos Lanthimos' latest collaboration with Emma Stone that I am very eager to see. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and over on popcult.blog, we'd encourage you to support us on Patreon. We have lots of different reward levels to pick from. I want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who donate at the writer's room level. When you donate at that level or higher, you'll get to pick 1 movie a month for me to watch, review, and you can even add your own thoughts if that's something you want to do. We also have exclusive patron-only podcasts. We'll be kicking off a new series this coming Saturday, March the 5th, I believe, where we will be doing another roleplay series using the very silly capitalist satirical system of Corp Borg to play as cubicle zombies fighting our way through a demonic infested landscape. Well, until next time, my friends, you keep listening and we'll keep watching.